Okay, well, welcome everybody. For those of you who haven't been to one of these before, we try to keep the discussion pretty informal and have people involved. So feel free to turn on your cameras. And if you want to ask a question or chime in on a discussion, maybe introduce yourself briefly before you start so we can kind of get to know each other a little bit better. So my name is Juliet. I'm the chair of the Early Career Seabirders Committee for World Seabird Union. And we have with us today Dr. Kyle Elliott from McGill University. If you work in North America with seabirds, you've probably run across Kyle at some point. He's got his fingers in pretty much every project there is. And he has a huge network of collaborators and a lot of students that he works with and is very involved in seabird work kind of throughout the continent. So I won't go into too many biographical details, but I'll kind of let him talk a little bit about his background, but I'm really excited to have him here today, and I think I'll have some really interesting insights for us about kind of for people who are maybe looking forward to starting a research lab or joining a research lab, about kind of how to put that together and get involved with mentoring at various career stages. So Kyle, do you want to maybe kind of talk about how you came to working with seabirds and to your current position?
Yeah, hopefully I can live up to that. Yeah, it's very kind of you. um, I have my PSG mug here, 2015. I think you were there. I met you there in San Jose, so that's my mug for today. And one other thing is that apparently Hydro-Quebec is in the area, and last time they came, I lost power. So if I lose power for a moment, I'll try and come in on my data plan on my phone. But if you lose me, that's probably what happened. But yeah, I was very fortunate in that my father worked for the Canadian Wildlife Service, and so I started doing seabirds when I was really young. I was 9 years old when my dad took me out and was digging and grubbing for storm petrels and rhinoceros auklets on the islands off the coast of BC. So he studied contaminants, and he worked for the Wildlife Service and still does, doing that. And so I guess that's how I started. And I tried to leave that behind. I met somebody who told me that you can never make a career out of ornithology, and I should try and do something else and leave birds as a hobby. And so I went and I actually did my undergrad in physics, and then worked as a physicist for a few years. I worked for a telecommunications company, worked for at a particle accelerator for a little while, and realized that I absolutely hated that. It was just not it was just not something you'd be in this huge, basically a big gymnasium full of machines, and you'd be programming all day, and it was really kind of unpleasant, I felt, but some people loved it. So, but it wasn't for me. And so I decided to leave that and to work in to go back in biology. And I think it was always kind of in my nature. I remember showing up once at my supervisor's desk, and he was looking at me, and I had two bags full of flowers that I collected just kind of around. I was kind of trying to learn all the local flowers, and he said, "I think you're a biologist at heart." So I went back from that, and I went and I kind of became a field bum for a couple of years. And so I worked on a bunch of projects. I did some shorebird work up in the Arctic. I went down to South America. I worked in Panama on mannequins. I worked in Australia on bowerbirds. I just kind of bummed around, and I used that money I made being a physicist, because it paid really well, to do that. And then after a couple of years, I was working for Tony Gaston. He said, why don't you just go do a master's? I mean, that seems to be what you want to do. You keep coming back. Yeah, you keep doing the seabird stuff. So why don't you do that? And so he introduced me to Gail Davrin, and I showed up in Winnipeg and did a master's on foraging behavior of thick-billed murres with Gail. And I did that for 2 years. And then I took another couple of years. I worked a bit, I made some money, and I published. And I think that was really beneficial towards applying to a PhD, because it was certainly a lot easier to get a PhD once I'd already published. And so I did my PhD at back at the University of Manitoba. I was going to do it in the University of Missouri with Bob Rickliffs, and Bob said, well, why don't you just stay at Manitoba, because I met my wife there, I was getting married, and so it just made kind of a lot more sense. And so I stayed in Winnipeg at the University of Manitoba and did my PhD there. Um, After doing my PhD, a number of people had told me, well, you're just a bird person. You'll never get a job as just a bird person. You have to kind of branch out. And so I did a postdoc on Drosophila, and so I studied Drosophila for a year, and then I ended up getting hired basically as an ornithologist. And so both positions I interviewed for, they were interested in ornithologists, and so that completely wasted, really. I mean, certainly learned something, but um, my advice would be that if you're interested in seabirds, just go out and do seabird stuff. Don't worry about being pigeonholed as a seabird biologist. At least didn't matter to me. And so in 2015, a month before this meeting, I started on faculty here at McGill University, and I've been here ever since. So maybe that's a little more long-winded than you want, but that's a little summary of me.
Oh, that's perfect. So I will open up the floor, and anyone who has sort of a question or some topic that they want to talk about can raise it, either turn on your microphone or post something in the chat.
I can also add that there are, you wanted me to talk a little bit about undergrads today, and Kristen, Eric, and Emily have all done honors theses with me, so they can, share their experiences as well
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of start because that was kind of the topic that I introduced as being, I think, something that's really interesting to early career scientists, in part because we're thinking a lot about like barriers to entry and the importance of giving people experience that's paid as undergrads that will allow them to go on to either, full-time positions or grad school without having to take on unpaid work after undergrad. And you seem to do a very good job with training undergrads and having them publish and really setting them up for success as soon as they finish their undergrad career. So I was kind of wondering like what your philosophy is and how you go about like mentoring undergrads and getting them to that point.
Well, I wish I could say it was all about me or that I had some great tips, but I think it's mostly been the undergrads. I mean, I feel like I have done far less than, I think it's mostly all, and the hard work that they've done, and I've been able to work with some very special undergrads that have been very talented, and I'd say it's mostly them. I guess also, collaborating and working with grad students or other people has been kind of really helpful as well. I think Kristen, so was working with a PhD student, Shannon, and so I think that that's really helpful, is to kind of pair the undergrad up with the graduate student. And I think Shannon helped Kristen an awful lot. She also, Kristen, I can let you talk about that, but you went to work at Morgan Benowitz Fredericks and got trained on how to do some biopsies. So both Shannon and Kristen went and did that, and then went up to Middleton Island and did some to do her field work up there, and then did the honors thesis afterwards. Likewise, Eric was working with David Gramoulet, and so I think was very fortunate to have that kind of collaboration, and so was driven a lot by David and all the kind of time and effort he put into to this. And as well, there's just such a network of people there, right? That they're at home, there's other graduate students. So Eric likewise kind of had the experience of going to work with going to Oregon to be kind of trained on using the isotope analyzer, and then with Don Powers, and then went up to Greenland to do the field work, and then came back and did the analysis and the write-up in my lab. And Emily kind of unfortunately has been the COVID student, and so she's been lab-based the whole time, working with Allison, who is a graduate student, so a PhD student who had collected a whole bunch of feathers and had done some really neat work in the field and needed somebody to look at these feathers. And so Emily's been, the person who hasn't been able to have a field experience due to COVID. And maybe we'll be able to change that sometime in the future. Yeah.
Did any of you
But
three
Kristen or
students
Eric?
want to maybe weigh in on your perspective on the experience?
Sure, I can go. I guess as an undergrad, I wasn't really sure what I wanted. Having the opportunity to, do my own field research and then do an honors project to really help solidify the fact that I was interested in research and wanted to do a master's. So from that perspective, it was really helpful.
I can also talk a bit about my experience, and I came into it not knowing that I liked birds that much. It was actually, I was more interested in the marine side, like marine biology was always what I wanted to do. McGill, and then while I was doing my undergrad was when Kyle started at McGill, and I remember he was invited to Dr. Jessica Head's one of the courses she was teaching, and just to give like a little kind of spiel about his work and stuff like that. And I thought that was like super, super cool. And it was related to like marine stuff, like seabirds. So I was like, okay, like maybe that'll be my in into the marine biology world. And the year before I had done a like field assistant job up in the Arctic. And I knew, so I was like, okay, so and I have some Arctic experience. And here comes a seabird biologist who does like, yeah, seabirds, so both Arctic and marine. So I contacted him, and I was very excited when I found out that there was the opportunity for me to not only do the honors thesis project in his lab, but to actually get to go to Greenland with some other amazing David Grimillet, which we're now finishing up a publication based on that. And I ended up doing sharks for my master's afterwards, but now I'm coming back for a PhD probably with seabird stuff. So it's been, yeah, definitely really appreciated that experience I got.
I mean, how do you think the master's kind of contributed? Sorry, Emily,
That's okay.
I was just wondering.
It did like link well with my master's because the seabird stuff I was working with Little Ox to kind of get at what their activity costs were using doubly labeled water and accelerometers. So looking at their metabolism during flight and while they're diving and foraging. And so after that, for my master's, I basically pitched a project to Nigel Hussey, being like, well, I have some metabolism experience, and so could we do something like that with Greenland sharks? And so again, continuing on that energetics kind of trajectory, linking behavior and some physiology stuff together. And he was super on board for that. And we ended up designing a custom like swimming pool up on the beach in the Arctic to measure the metabolism of a Greenland shark, which is pretty fun. And then we tagged a bunch of other sharks with accelerometers and stuff to do some metabolism modeling. Crazy cool experience. And again, even though I didn't stay with the seabirds in my master's, it was definitely valuable experience, like, and helped me kind of through my master's afterwards.
I guess just for me, it was kind of the same story, but also I found doing an honors really helped with the confidence, I guess, to go on to do a master's, because I've always found it to be incredibly, and you have to know, I feel like you feel the pressure to already know things about certain topics before even pursuing them in a master's. So this really gave me exposure to all the things people were working on in Kyle's lab, and gave me confidence of like, okay, it's not as hard as you think, and you're not on your own. You're with your lab family, I guess. So it was a lot of fun too.
I feel like a common theme from, oh, go ahead, Eric.
I'm gonna say, yeah, one of the big things, like looking back on my undergraduate and stuff that I think is like important. I don't know if there are any current undergraduates here right now, but was that often like the curriculums like don't move, kind of change fast enough in the actual like programs that you sign on for. So and there's this kind of like just general, everyone just goes into their undergrad thinking like the only thing that'll matter at the end is their marks. And now like so much of what matters when you're a grad student has to do with your experience and stuff like that, which is not, often not well built into these programs. So both in terms of like getting actual research experience, but also like coding and stuff. There's still like almost no universities that offer like good coding courses and stuff like that. So I could say if I have one piece of advice now, it's contact people, get like volunteer in a lab, do a thesis or research project if you can, and also like teach yourself if it's not available at your university, like some coding, because that's a very marketable set. Even if your GPA is not as high as some other people, you might, I think that'll give you a leg up when you are looking for grad school. If you can say, I know how to code in R, plus I have experience like working in a lab and therefore like a good reference, that's probably very helpful.
Yeah, those are all great points. I feel like a common theme from what I hear from undergrads is, how important it is just to be able to, understand a little bit about grad school. I came from a different experience, having a father who, was a biologist already. So I kind of had that privilege, but, I hear again and again from undergrads that being able to interact with graduate students and be able to spend a time, they come to, because all the undergrads are expected to come to my lab meetings and, to interact with the grad students. And if not, they're at least, they're spending time with Allison or Shannon or David and getting to understand a little bit about how science works and what grad school is. Because I always find grad school is such a weird thing. It's very clear. You have these courses. I mean, it's kind of like, high school, right? You have courses, you write exams, you get marks. And then in grad school, you're just told, well, just go off for 2 years and do something and come back. And, it's a really kind of different thing. And it can be really odd, I think, for many undergrads to understand, even just things like, well, you'll probably get paid to do grad school. You're not going to have to go in debt for that. And, a lot of undergrads don't even realize that. They think, oh my goodness, I'm not going to do a master's. I'm already, this far in debt, or I don't want to not get paid for another 2 years. And so, or realize kind of what an exciting opportunity that can be. So I think that one of the things that is really helpful for honor students is just to see what it's like to be a grad student. I don't know if you guys would agree, but that's the feedback I often get.
So we talked a little bit about switching between fields, I guess, between kind of your experience and then, students' experiences. So I'm kind of curious, like, how often do you take on grad students that come from a completely different undergraduate background, or how often do your undergraduates go on to some completely different graduate field?
That's a good question. I guess I stayed within science, so it's not that big of a switch. And there are certainly some, Allison did her undergrad in geography, which has kind of it's a little bit different. I think it was a BA, so I think it was an arts. And then she switched over to kind of doing something a little more science oriented. And she brings kind of a different perspective from that. She's really good on the kind of spatial side of things, and is perhaps a little less interested sometimes on the physiology side of things. I have students which have come from kind of environmental sciences type of background, but most of them come from a biology background. And in principle, I get contacted primarily by people from a biology background. I don't know how, I don't think that it would be that much of an impediment to for somebody to come from an arts background or from an engineering background. It might be actually really interesting, but I haven't experienced that too much. I have had students which have gone on to do like a master's in engineering of kind of like environmental engineering, and that have gone on to do like science communication, and and then kind of different things like in finance and education. And those often do other things after having a degree in environmental biology. I feel like if you have a strong undergraduate experience and you're good with quantitative skills, you're able to write. Those are skills which can be transferable to a lot of different careers. So certainly students go on to different things after doing an honors thesis in my lab. I feel, I guess one of the things they're able to publish their thesis, then that kind of shows a potential, or even just presented at a conference. I mean, it kind of shows somebody who's trying to evaluate them or separate them on a kind of a whole bunch of, they have a pile of CVs and they can say, well, this person did a science degree. Not only that, but they actually went to the point where they were able to publish or at least present their data. So that's kind of can kind of set them apart, right? It shows them that they're going to go, they're going to be able to complete whatever it is that they were trying to ask them to do.
So for either, I guess, you or students, yours or other students in the room, one thing I'm kind of curious about is like getting into the publication process. Like my experience as a grad student, at least with my master's, was like no one gave me very much guidance. I was kind of on my own, and I really, didn't do a great job the first time around and kind of learned as I went. And then there's, the flip side of the coin where there are people that kind of really, really help their students through the entire process and end up kind of writing most of the paper themselves. I'm sure there's kind of a middle ground where, the student does the work, but also has support from the advisor. But I'm wondering about, people's experiences and what they found worked in terms of like getting students over that first hurdle of like starting to publish and navigating that world.
Well, I can ramble on for a little longer. Yeah, so you said that I was, good at getting undergrads to publish. I mean, I feel like the opposite. That I feel like there's a number of students which haven't been able to kind of publish, and that I'd say it's it's the special minority here that are able to get to that point for various reasons. I mean, either that they just were no longer interested in it and weren't able to quite get to that point by the end of their honors thesis. I mean, there's there's mental health issues which have come up. There are just students which just, this wasn't the right thing for them, or they just, other students where they were just decided that, they wanted to do 20 different things in their undergrad. They were going to volunteer for 20 different places and try and do an honors thesis and try and have 5, classes per term. And it just, it ends up being the thesis that suffers in the end, because you can always push that off. And so, I guess the difference, I think, between, I think it's really important for the students to kind of thesis and to try and make that as kind of the primary thing that they're trying to do that year. They're not trying to take too many classes, and they're not trying to volunteer on too many other things. And to kind of, I try and meet weekly with the students and to try and make sure that they kind of progress. And I think that's a really important part because, just like grad school, but with an undergraduate, it goes by so quickly, right? And if we don't meet regularly, it's very easy for exams or everything else to come. But I feel like a student, if they were right a little bit every week, and then they're they certainly over the course of 8 months, they can have a paper done at the end of it. But it is trying to make sure that a little bit of progress is done every time. And then I guess also working with the grad students to be able to I'm sure that Emily, Eric, and Kristen would say that they had some support from graduate students as well, kind of with the writing process. I know we usually start with writing the methods and results and first, and once that's done, then try and first off, I think all the students had to write a literature review at the start, and so they had to write about kind of a 10-page literature review, and so they kind of know about the field, and so they'd have different subsections that we'd agree upon. Maybe there'd be 4 or 5 subsections and kind of topics that they have to be learn something, and then at the same time doing the analysis. And then once they finish the analysis, write the methods and results, and then take some of that literature review and kind of crunch it into an introduction that kind of makes sense. And then, the discussion, I guess, kind of responds to the introduction. And usually once you have an introduction, methods and results, the discussion isn't too hard to write. And yeah, I think that's kind of been the process we've done with all 3 of you. So. I guess every week and not leave it to the very end.
I will add also that it's helpful if you can get it as close to publication ready, like while you're still like working within that lab. And I think I don't know if there's other grad students or along their grads. Even as a grad student, I think that often happens too when you're transitioning between either from grad school to a job or from one grad school to another, like maybe masters, between masters and PhD. It can be easy for, now you have new responsibilities and a new boss, let's say, to then like it's harder to balance. So as much as possible, I think it's helpful if you can get as much done before you move on as possible. Obviously, that's not always possible. That was the case with myself now. So we had to do a second field season because of recapture, but I couldn't do that second field season. So we had to have someone else come in. And then masters, when I started like getting it ready for publication, my honors thesis. But I'm happy with how it turned out. I'm happy we waited and didn't try and publish with just the first one, because I think it's a really cool paper now, and it's possibly going to go into a nice journal. But there's that. The other thing is just managing expectations about publication too, and that no matter how many times you've published, it's always different. My first paper was very smooth that I published. Like everything went. So master's chapter 1 was like such a long and drawn out review process. So depending on what reviewers you get and what journal you're in and all that can like really affect how the publication experience goes. And that can definitely be hard sometimes, like in terms of mental health or your whole experience. It's hard not to let it get to heart when reviewer 2 like tells you you're a worthless piece of I don't want to swear on this. So definitely managing expectation, realizing that that's like a normal thing.
Yeah, it's been a long road for Eric. What we got collected the data in 2017, and now here we are in 2021, and we've had one set of reviews, and looks like it probably going to go through, but still doing revisions.
Can I maybe ask something?
Yeah, please.
Well, maybe I should introduce myself quickly. I'm Marla Kavelaars, and I finished my PhD on parental care in girls last year. And I have a question about how you get students to do something, well, publication worthy, because how like how much freedom do you give them? Because obviously it needs to fit into your group, but it shouldn't overlap too much with the grad students or the PhD students that they're working with. But yeah, how do you get them to do something useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for all 3 students here, I think that would be generally true for an undergraduate thesis. I'm pretty prescriptive in kind of what, this is the question that I think would be really worthwhile. Changes over time, and what you, like so much field work, what you originally thought you were going to answer, you end up answering something a little different. So, I mean, the idea of kind of combining the accelerometers with the doubly labeled water for Eric was kind of an idea that we had with David, and then, he kind of ran with it from there. And we had this one little idea, and he expanded into a whole project, right? And came up with a protocol and so forth. Same with, Emily's doing what was going to be a chapter for a PhD student. I mean, she collected all these file logging and stuff, but in the end, it's not going to go into her thesis because she just had, she has enough in her thesis already. And so it's a kind of a lost chapter that instead Emily's going to do something with. And so that's great. And with Kristen, I guess, Shannon, was going out there. It was her first field season as well. So she didn't have a clear idea of what she was going to do, but she had some ideas. And I was like, well, here's this project that I've wanted. And, so this doesn't really fit into your thesis. So why don't you work with Kristen on this? And so I guess that's how that project evolved. And again, I gave Kristen this one idea, but in fact, the original idea was to look at aging and muscle senescence and movement, and it ended up being kind of the link between muscle and movement that we ended up publishing. So it it kind of it took off in a different. I don't know if any of you guys have thoughts or feedback in terms of the amount of guidance you had, or how much freedom you had to develop the project.
I'd say there was a bit of freedom too, like within that topic, like for example, with the growth bars, for whatever reason that really interests me. And then you guys let me do that, and I was able to incorporate it in without deviating, I guess, our main focus. So I'd say there was a clear guidance, but you had room a bit to look at things you were interested in.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I feel like all three of you, I mean, you had, again, this kind of idea, but the details were all, and that was, you guys figured out, how to do the project, and kind of took it in a different direction in some cases. So definitely.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Kyle. So for those of you I haven't met, my name's Brian Hoover. I've got a master's and a PhD in seabird stuff, kind of all over the map. And I've kind of become interested in teaching a little bit more lately. So my question, Kyle, kind of has to do with DEI stuff. And that is, the little bit that I've seen with undergrads that approach questions about getting involved in a lab or on projects, that takes a certain amount of wherewithal and confidence and knowledge of how the system, know how to contact a PI to become involved in the lab. So I was just wondering if you had kind of thoughts about how do we cast a wider net to be able to reach and mentor, the Shire kids or the first generation kids or whatnot in the classroom that, might really excel, but might not know how to, get involved in the lab or whatnot.
Yeah, that's a really really tough one, right? And it's certainly true that the undergrads I have that show up in their first are really keen are often ones who have parents which were professionals or scientists or whatever, and so they kind of know how things work a little bit. And I mean, that was the case for me as well, right? I mean, my father was a biologist, so I guess what we try and do is to try and from their first year, they get exposed to a little bit of research. We have kind of a course, St. Lawrence Ecosystems, and we feature some researchers in that course, and that's relatively new. And from the very start, we kind of give them this kind of 10-minute lecture of, okay, well, you're at McGill University. It's one of the top research universities in Canada. It's maybe not the best place for teaching in the sense that, if you went to a small liberal arts college, you might get better instruction. You might get, more kind of one-on-one time. But what you can really get out of this is, kind of really leading edge research, hopefully. And so, what we hope you can really take away from this, or one thing that you can really be to do, really exciting research. And especially in biology, I feel that's a really important part of, if you can, and of course not everybody can, but if you can get that experience, it can be really, useful going forward. And so we try and emphasize that from the start, and kind of explain, okay, and this is how you would do it. You'd kind of, contact a professor, contact a faculty member, or if you, here's some other, like you could try going a government route and contact that might be interested in, having because often people working for the Wildlife Service or Environment Canada are looking for field assistants for the summer. And so you can try and get experience that way. I mean, putting towards job boards, but then also say, listen, if you apply to one of these jobs on job boards, there's probably going to be 200 applicants for, the really cool ones. And, your chance of getting it is kind of low. Often you'd be much more successful to go towards, government or, a nonprofit, or for, environmental consulting agency that hire you for the summer, and they're probably not advertising there. You just have to try and make that contact, and to expect that, I always say, if you, contact 9 people, maybe, 3 will respond and 1 might actually have a job. So, you'd have to be persistent that way. So I try and be as clear as possible about kind of what you have to do to try and get those, that work in biology. And so that's not necessarily research oriented, but and a little bit of a rambling answer, but it, at least giving some information for people who don't have that background.
Does that St. Lawrence class, that exposure, seem like that's made a difference since it's been implemented?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been some students with, I think we've had a more diverse group, in terms of like ethnically diverse and both in terms of background. I think it has been successful. The sample size is still kind of low to figure that out. I do think that has helped. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm a white male teaching in a program which is 70% female. And so I guess there's bigger structural changes that need to happen just in terms of students being able to see themselves in terms of researchers, that they don't all look like me. And so, those are kind of other, big things that have to change. I think they are changing, but probably too slowly.
Yeah. No, delightful. Should have mentioned my own mug is 2018 Seabird or PSG. I think that's the La Paz one, right? So.
Oh, great! Yeah, that was a great conference. Yeah, Natasha.
Hi, Kyle.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you? I'm a little bit less early career maybe, but I'm just second year faculty, so I feel kind of like a postdoc a lot of the time. And I'm working at a teaching college. So one of the things I'm dealing with, and I'm definitely in the case where I switched. So I worked on primarily fish for a long time. And so I've like switched in the last few years, the conferences I go to. So I'm thinking a lot about which conferences I want to make my conference moving forward. And the thing I'm grappling with is like smaller conferences, students. I mean, I know from going to these smaller conferences how amazing the experience is. When they're only like 200 people, everyone by the end, but that might really be like kind of pigeonholing them into working with Pacific Seabirds or something. So what is bringing an undergraduate student to a smaller conference versus a larger conference where they can make wider connections but might be intimidated? If you have any insight there.
Yeah. I don't think that Eric ever went to a conference with me. I think Emily's going to the AOS and Kristen went to the SCO, if I recall, kind of after her undergrad. And and that's the Society of Canadian Ornithologists. And so for instance, this summer, I've told the undergrads, and it's easy this summer because it's virtual. It means it doesn't cost me anything. And it cost me very little, and it doesn't cost them very much in terms of time as well, because some of them are doing summer jobs, and so they have to be able to do, they can't take a week off to go to a conference if they're working somewhere. And so I gave them the option of going to 3 different conferences. I said that I kind of involved with the Canadian Society of Zoologists, the American Ornithological Society, and the Animal Behavior Society. And I kind of see them in those 3 levels of kind of, the Animal Behavior Society is very broad, it's very big. The AOS, still pretty big. The CSED is going to be quite a bit smaller. I guess it kind of depends on, I've tried to give them a little bit of encouragement in terms of what I think would be most suitable for their project, but also that they would get something out of. I mean, if they're American, and I have 2 American going to the CSED because it's Canadian focused, and so unless they want to do grad school in Canada, there's no point in them going to that one. And then the AOS, I mean, if they want to stay in birds, is probably a pretty good one. But if they want, if they're interested in trying to talk with and interact with potential supervisors, which are doing bird stuff, and that's great. But if they don't want to do birds, then maybe they'd be better off, branching out. And the ABS is not a bad one. One student is going to the Wildlife Society as well, so that kind of focused towards what she was interested in. So I think it really depends on the student and what they want to do. I mean, if they're just like, no, I just want to do seabirds and that's what I want to do, then encourage them to go to the PSG. If they wanted to do Arctic stuff, then maybe they want to go to an Arctic one. And of course, that being said, you do want them to go to something where there's other members of the lab, because otherwise it can be really daunting and really lonely. And, ideally one where I'm there, right? So I can kind of introduce them to people and, but I don't go to that many conferences, so it often at least if they can go there with other lab members and other grad students, that can help them out.
Yeah, I think having grad students, I think like I'm thinking about doing the same conference every year, so there's like some consistency, familiar faces and stuff. So, but it kind of sounds like you would maybe then suggest a bigger one if it would, I could be there and help direct them, because at least then there are subsections, and something I've just been thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, if you're going to have a lab full of seabird biologists, then, maybe the PhD, I mean, it's very friendly. It's easy to get to know people. But I mean, if you feel like a lot of your undergrads are going to go on to other things, then maybe a broader conference would be helpful.
Butt in on this question. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a PhD student at the University of Manitoba right now. Good to see everyone. And a long while ago now, I was an undergraduate and was very fortunate to be able to go to a couple of different conferences. When I was an undergraduate, I had no idea what I wanted to do, right? I barely knew that I wanted to study biology. So my experiences, though, at conferences was actually fortunate. The first conference I went to was a larger one. I think it was the International Society for Limnology, or whatever the proper acronym is. I was lucky enough to be helping out with a project on zooplankton, and but that conference was very broad, people from all over the world, and it was valuable to me to be exposed to that breadth of possible research at that stage. And later on, as an undergraduate, I got to attend a smaller bird-focused conference. So I think it was the Wilson Ornithological Society, where my advisor knew everybody there, and it felt like old home day, and getting to experience that kind of scientific community and feel like you're a part of it is valuable too. So I don't know if that helps you answer your question whatsoever. But again, sort of echoing Kyle's point that talking with the student, thinking about which of those might be beneficial to them, depending on whether they know what they want to be doing, whether they are feeling like they're not a part of science and would benefit from feeling like a part of a community, or whether they aren't struggling with that, but would benefit from seeing sort of the breadth of different science that's out there.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I would like, hello, first of all, hi, I'm Mariana. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, Mariana.
So I am a postdoc, and I have started to supervise students, both undergrads and PhD students. So I have a question actually for the students. So when you started, when you approached Kyle or you approached any other PI, was it that things could have worked out, or like that things could have not worked out and would have been okay? I mean, because I do want to, I start from the perspective that I want the project to work, but I want the student to be happy about it, because I want the student to actually have a good experience. But things might work and might not work. I mean, I can try to steer and shape, but things might not work. So if you had that perspective in mind, okay.
Yeah, I guess I could go first, unless Eric, you wanted to go first. Yeah, I wanted to get research experience. I think that was my main goal. Like when I initially started, I didn't really think of like the whole publication abstract, I guess, aspect of it. I was just kind of wanting to see if I liked research. So even for the project, didn't have like super exciting results. I kind of thought research was, and yeah, Kyle did plant the publication seed pretty early, and my paper that was published ended up looking pretty different from what I started, and it was kind of interesting to see the project kind of morph along the way. But yeah, at the beginning, I guess I wasn't really nervous about whether or not it would fail.
So I had worked in one lab before with like insects. So that first one, I didn't like, there was nothing necessarily about insects specifically I wanted. I just saw a posting for a field assistant. And so I went after that. And then I got to kind of experience that research process. And then happened to just like do a separate little project because we had extra time in the field. So we just like collected data and they're like, hey, what if we do like a special topics, like kind of credit, and you could write like a paper on that. So again, I went into it with like no intention of publishing experience and like, I think it was just like, hey, field, I get to go like on a trip somewhere. So, and then after that, I kind of saw that research process. So when I finally saw Kyle and was interested in that, I think I approached it already with a bit more of an intention to like, that I knew I wanted, I like that of things, and I wanted to kind of push through with that right off the bat in that experience. But my first one, yeah, I did not have that intention at all. And it helped to have a PhD student who was like really helping me kind of building up that kind of like understanding and kind of love of the research side early on, I think helped quite a bit. And then really kind of walking publication process like very kind of clearly and helpfully, because something that now I just think like, oh, that's just like common sense, everyone's publishing, but like I did that at first. So having someone who like was like in a very friendly way communicating the steps to me along the way, it very kind of helpful and built up later for
That's great. Thank you. That's great. I'm learning. I'm really so many things tonight. Really, it's helping me a lot.
I mean, I guess I'd add to that I mean, 3 students here have gone into biology or continued in biology, or I don't know what Emily will end up doing, but I mean, there's quite a few other students which haven't published or have gone on to haven't continued in biology, and well, that's fine too. I mean, that's great. I hope that this experience helped them realize that maybe this wasn't for them, or even if it was for them, that they wanted to do something else even more. And so, it's just nice to see everyone, continue and see what they end up doing with their lives, even if it's, something completely different. And then just the kind of point about conferences, that if, I always feel it's a good experience at least to go to a conference. So even, just for kind of their own, so that they've, I really feel like they've kind of had the science experience, if they can at least present something at a conference, I think that's a good experience. It kind of feels like they've really well.
And another question about something you kind of, or I guess it was either Kristen or Emily mentioned earlier, like talking about the lab family. I was wondering about like how, when you're bringing on a new student, whether it's an undergrad or a grad student, how you kind of assess how they'll fit into your program besides, just their past experience or publications. Is there anything you look for to figure out how well they'll kind of operate within your particular lab environment?
No, not really, not at all. Actually, I leave it up to the graduate student. So I figure, they're going to have to work with this person, and so they better decide whether or not this is a person they want to work with. And as long as I've my attitude towards graduate students has always been that they have to be kind of team players. I think I have a colleague that works molecular stuff, and she's always looking for marathon runners, the people that just can kind of outlast everyone else and are kind of really driven and kind of very inwards motivated. And I said, for me, those marathon runners, it wouldn't work. I couldn't have more than one in the lab. It's really important that they're kind of team players, and so that they're, more into team sports or whatever. They're on a volleyball team or something, in the sense that, they have to get along with other people and they have to be able to work with other people, and, especially in a field camp. So I guess that's the type of person I would be looking for. And I rely a lot on the kind of assessment of the graduate student, especially if they're going to be spending, 4 months with them out in, in the Arctic. They better get along with this person. And if they don't, then I don't want them to blame me. I want them to, blame themselves.
So for those of you who might have come in after we started the discussion, I would encourage anyone who has questions or points that they want to make to turn on their video and introduce themselves and chime in.
One thing that I liked being in Kyle's lab a lot was definitely a attitude among the grad students, but and the undergrads too. I found the group was very well, and there was lots of external activities too. So when you made the volleyball analogy there, it was kind of true, because we did play volleyball every week together as a lab, regardless of our skill levels at volleyball. It was just a fun thing to do. At 5 o'clock on Thursdays, I think we'd go out to the volleyball pit. Not everyone would come every time, but it was a good way to kind of also get some stuff going in the lab. Have some activities where everyone's together, work related.
It's been really too bad the last year. I mean, obviously we've been in quarantine and so forth, and we can't do anything like that. So not allowed to congregate. So, I mean, it's really too bad in the last year, but hopefully sometime soon. And we have been trying to do things over Zoom, have parties and stuff, but it's not the same, is it? But sometime soon.
I was about to say the same, because the only thing that I can say right now to the students is, I am on Skype. You can just call me. I'm here. yeah. So I would love to get together again. Absolutely, yeah. That's important. You say the right thing. I mean, especially for the mental health, or for building the team and everything. Absolutely, yeah.
So any tips from anyone on, not replacing that in-person community, but managing online community building? Because I have no answers.
I will say there are a lot of really great online games that you can play for free. So I don't know if you've ever played Code Names, but Horse Pace, I think, is the name of the website. Really easy to play online. I can put a PDF in the chat of all of the online free games, but I played Among Us with my class recently as a Friday night thing. And they loved 10 of my 19 students came to play Among Us on a Friday night, and it was great. So I think online games are good, especially if they're less, I think the thinking games are not as good for that, but Among Us or something that's social is good.
Yeah, we had we also did we had a gingerbread competition, and we had a pumpkin carving competition, and less this spring. I guess the spring is always better than the fall, where things are getting darker and darker here in Montreal. But a few things like that is kind of good too. I saw somebody had a Mr. Potato Head contest, so you can always do those types of things. At least it encourages grad students to do something other than sit at their computer.
Something else that Kyle's lab has been doing is singing happy birthdays over Zoom, which is nice, but also kind of terrible because it's not in sync at all.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a reward or a punishment.
You're up next week, Kristen.
That's true.
Yeah.
So in terms of logistics, if you have, I did sort of a quick count on your website, I think, and it was like 9 PhD students and 5 masters and 6 undergrads or something. And you've got all these different projects going on. How do you manage just kind of the people side and making sure everyone has everything they need in the field and dealing with issues that come up? Just having so many people spread out over so many different projects.
Yeah, well, I've been very fortunate that many of them are co-supervised, and so sometimes that burden is primarily on somebody else. So for instance, supervised by somebody in government, and so most of the logistics is done by that person in the government. But again, I feel like having the graduate student work primarily with the undergraduate student, or pairing people together, can be really helpful towards facilitating the logistics, so that so that they're kind of learning from one another. I don't have to repeat things 10 times over. They're kind of the lab culture to get how to deal with these particular things. And so I mean, I guess again, kind of making sure that things are part of a team and that people are kind of interacting with one another, so that, for instance, with our code, you don't have 10 different students creating 10 different codes that all do the same thing. And so trying to make sure that people are interacting with one another, and same with the logistics in the field, like what to do, and that they're kind of talking with one another and figuring out kind of the best way of doing things rather than reinventing the wheel each time. It's always a challenge with the students. I mean, both Chris and Eric were fortunate enough to go to the field. That isn't always the case. Many of the students, it just there's only so much room in the field, and so much funding for going to remote, faraway places. And so I think for undergrads in particular, there's a burden. There are some kind of more kind of campus oriented projects which are a little easier for some undergrads who just can't. I mean, either they're not able to, maybe they have a partner they don't want to leave, family obligations that they can't leave behind, or just aren't ready to do that. And so then they can kind of have there's projects kind of nearer to campus which can be suitable for them. And then kind of on the logistics side of things, it's always a little bit daunting to send a student off into the wild. Is Eric going to be okay in Greenland? Just lots to think about there. And for instance, on the insurance side of things, I mean, I wouldn't want to send a student to the US, for instance, expecting to have kind of public coverage. So just making sure that they are completely covered, and if anything goes wrong, at the very least they'll be insured, so that they're not going to be stuck in some hospital bed there and trying to figure out the insurance side of things. And so there's that side of the logistics as well. And encouraging that, or making them take wilderness first aid and make sure they're all trying to cover it that way. But certainly the logistical side of things keeps up a lot of room in my mind. But at the moment we can't do anything anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I think is important to, especially to undergraduate students, like making them aware that even the best financial situation or whatever, they can still kind of participate. There's obviously not many, but there are some like undergraduate kind of funding opportunities. Like NSERC, for example, has theirs, which I definitely used when I was in Kyle's lab. But there's also, like, if you're doing Northern stuff, like there's the Northern Scientific Training Program, which also will help pay for some of the logistic stuff of the fieldwork. And just, I think for some students, they just think, oh, I'm gonna spend the money and send me somewhere, whatever. But there's like other places to kind of access, and that might be helpful to undergraduate students to know that when they contact a professor or something, to be like, hey, like I've heard about this, I would love to apply for that, with the intention of like getting some experience in this kind of thing. And I think approaching somebody already with some of that information in hand could be like, give you a bit more confidence when you email someone, but also possibly make you stand out compared to other people.
Yeah, I mean, on the kind of financial side of things, I feel like in some ways undergrads are a better deal than graduate students, because often they do have other kind of pots of money, and even travel expenses and stuff are very limited for graduate students, but are sometimes more accessible for undergraduate students. And likewise, I mean, if you're, they're getting course credit as an honors thesis, so I don't pay them for the honors thesis, but the summer you have to pay them. So if they have an NSERC, so we have like an RUI equivalent in Canada, so that's like what we call the NSERC USRA. So if they get the scholarship, then that covers it. There are other bits and pieces of money, but still, it's probably a lot cheaper than a graduate student. Of course, depending on the graduate student and what type of funding they have. But and if things don't work out, you're only you only have to work together for a year, whereas with a graduate student, if then you're stuck together for longer.
So we're at the end of our hour, but I don't want to cut the discussion short if anyone has any burning thoughts or questions that they want to get in before the end. So please chime in if you do. All right. Well, thank you, Kyle, and thanks, Kristen and Eric and Emily as well. I definitely learned a lot, and I think others did as well. So we will be having our next meeting, let me just check, May 24th, and you can check Twitter and website for details on that. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and I will also post the recording if you know of anyone who is interested in the discussion but couldn't make it today. It'll be up on the World Seabird YouTube channel. So thank you, great seeing everybody, and have a good rest of your day. And thanks, Kyle, again.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure and nice seeing everybody. So nice to see so many familiar faces.
Maybe we'll all meet together in person one day.
One day soon, I hope.
I don't know, I'm starting to doubt it. But... All right.
Yeah.
Take care.